Good day, wherever you find yourself in the world. We are here. We are here in this space, engaged in the process to have a profound discussion about African consciousness, the elevation of such. And so we are excited about this moment to talk with the Dr. Julius Garvey. It's not often that you get a chance to talk to a thoracic surgeon who has a level of consciousness to have a discussion about Africanity. He is the son of the Honorable Marcus Garvey. And so, again, it is this legacy of greatness that we are engaged in this discussion about African consciousness. So I am Mawata Kairi, also known as Dr. Kevin Washington. I am an African Centered Psychologist. And so my notion is about understanding consciousness and beingness in the world. So Dr. Garvey, welcome to this discussion on this day around the world. Thank you for being here.
Well, it's good to be here, Dr. Washington. We had a first meeting, I guess, a couple of weeks ago, and this is, in a sense, part two, or at any rate, a follow-up on our first discussions. And I certainly enjoyed the first one, and I look forward to this one.
Indeed. So we actually connected again, like I said, some time ago in Washington, D.C. with Rock Newman. I've forgotten the name of the conversation, but you remember actually the topic. Right. I just remember the process because I was working at Howard at the time in the teaching in the counseling psychology program there. And so I was able to pass through and be a part of a discussion with you. So it is always a delight.
Just let me refresh your memory. That had to do with the exoneration of my father, which I was mobilizing back in 2016. And you were part of that discussion. And
indeed.
So I'm doing it again. It failed with the Obama administration, but now we're more hopeful with Biden, and we'll see how that goes. So we're mobilizing the troops again, so to speak.
So start from right there, right? So talk about the exoneration. What does it mean to exonerate, and why was that particular conversation important then, and why is it even important at this time?
Yeah, and you know, we have to start with the difference between exoneration and pardon. And one of the problems is that the only means that the president has in terms of exonerating is to give a posthumous pardon. So that's why it's couched in that sort of funny term, pardon. And then some people say, well, he wasn't guilty of anything, so why are you looking for a posthumous pardon? But that's the same as an exoneration if it is stated unequivocally that the trial was a farce and no crime was committed. So we have all the evidence for that it was a fraud. There was really no evidence except for an empty envelope, a perjured witness, and a DA who coached the witness to perjure. So the DA committed perjury himself, so that all of that should have been thrown out of court. And there was no conspiracy because nobody else was charged. They changed the charges because they really wanted to get Marcus Garvey. And as the prosecuting attorney said in his summation, can we turn the tiger loose? Well, the situation, as you would well know, was in the 20s. And this was a time of, rising black consciousness, which, my father epitomized that in terms of the background of the Harlem Renaissance. And he had, a major following. At that particular point in time, he had anywhere from, 4 to 6 million people who belonged to his organization in the United States and around the world. So it was a major organization. In 1920, he had that convention of the Negro peoples of the world, which was the first of its kind. And coming out of that was the rights of the Negro people of the world, which was our Magna Carta. And this was, being thrown in the face of, at the time, manifest white supremacy, because our boys had been coming back, from the First World War, 1418. They were being lynched even in uniform. And as you know, sharecropping and all of that. And there was no retribution or recompense, post-slavery. So the Ku Klux Klan was riding high, and basically they were running the South. And of course, there was a great migration of African Americans from the South to the North. And, my father's ideology hit them at the right time, if you will. They were looking for identity. They was looking for a history and a culture. They were looking to belong to something. And he provided that with the UNIA, Universal Negro Improvement Association, and African Communities League. So J. Edgar Hoover and white supremacists who he represented in terms of the Justice Department of the time saw that as a threat. and went after Marcus Garvey. So they concocted this particular trial, convicted him, and he spent almost 3 years in jail. So this has to be wiped clean, both in terms of restitution of justice, in terms of the U.S. Department of Justice, which has, egg on its face, as well as, of course, the reputation of my father and his continuing legacy as a major Pan-Africanist of the first half of the 20th century.
Wow. So thank you. I mean, that indeed packed with deep concepts, right, of lynching, exoneration, the reclamation of humanity coming back from the war, restitution. All those terms are so powerful. And what was the crime, right? And this is the crux of this conversation, this idea of consciousness. And you mentioned Black consciousness, this idea of being aware of oneself as being a human as opposed to being subhuman. And so this coming together, this Congress, this convention of African people convening was very threatening also. And they were coming together around what you said earlier as Black consciousness. And so this idea of awareness. So how then can Black consciousness, and we will talk about also African consciousness, because he said Africa for Africans at home and abroad. How can this African and or Black consciousness be a criminal act? How is that even possible?
Again, it's a matter of perspective. Consciousness from the African perspective is primary. It starts everything. All creation is based on consciousness, not on unconsciousness. It's based on consciousness. So consciousness is primary. Consciousness is the creator. Now, I think we mentioned the last time that our definition of consciousness would include awareness, as you've been talking about just now, as well as power. And also intelligence or wisdom. So it's a 3-in-1. And of course, we call that Amun, Ra, and Ptah. Now, that is the basis of African consciousness. And that is all throughout our spirituality. And we've seen that in Kemet. We see that wherever we go in terms of Ubuntu and the Bantu people. We see that with the Ashanti. We see that with the Yoruba and their expressions. We see that with the Dogon, and you can go all across Africa, and you can see that spirituality, African spirituality, is based on those ideas of God, that understanding of God, and that experience of our source. Now, that has been corrupted or denied in terms of Western, quote, civilization, because Western civilization is a civilization that has come to be based primarily on scientific materialism. So it's a materialistic civilization that does not give credence to consciousness. When it discusses consciousness then is seen as a byproduct of neuronal activity. So the concept is, and it goes back to the Big Bang theory and the theory of evolution, that somehow it started with matter. Boom, there was matter. And somehow over time, consciousness developed. So there's no such thing as design. There's no such thing as intelligence in creation. Where did intelligence come from? Based on the Big Bang and Darwin's theory of evolution. It just popped up out of matter. Now this is totally ridiculous. You can't have intelligence popping up out of insentient matter, and you can't have consciousness popping up out of insentient matter. None of that makes any sense. You see, so that goes against the African perspective. So the European perspective then, ever since Newton, et cetera, coming forward with all of their different scientists is materialism and scientific materialism. Now, when you see the universe from that perspective, then you don't admit anything that is not material. So the spiritual aspect of the human being or the consciousness aspect of the human being is denied. So all that is validated is the sensory perceptions and the activities that come from that sensory perception. So you have your five senses, your eyes, your ears, your nose, your mouth, and the feelings of your skin, and so on. Those are your senses and your sensory organs. And that brings information, perception into this thing called mind. And then mind thinks it through, and then mind acts as causative. So that is the loop. That is the loop of scientific materialism and the psychology that goes along with it. And I'm coming back to you now, you're the psychologist. But that is the loop in which people are conditioned themselves over and over and over. They're conditioned in that loop, and then they recondition themselves over and over. So you have programmed human beings, which are sort of robots. So you have the human biocomputer, which is robotic in that sense. Although, of course, we can, what do you call it? We can program ourselves. You say, but that is not understood. Our programming that we do is sort of subliminal, and it is not seen as such. I mean, obviously, what is that? It's habit. It's the habits that you create. And one habit reinforces the other habit because you do it over and over again. And it makes a groove in your neuronal system, the neurons and the nerve fibers and so on. So you don't have any neuroplasticity. You're just repeating the same thing over and over again. I think that's why a lot of people get demented, because you just have those one circuits. Now we're getting into a wider thing, and as you know, and I see you smiling, but we're almost going off track. And that's the point, is that it's so enormous, you see, and the system now that has been created, based on scientific materialism since the 18th century and so on, even going back earlier than that, obviously, but that is what dominates the world. So when you look at the world from that point of view, you really have boxed yourself into this programmatic situation where there's only matter, and you cannot explain anything outside of matter. You see, you cannot explain anything such as telepathy or a mental, spiritual action or energy action outside of the physical. I can hit you, and that's the only way I can transmit energy to you. Not true. I'm transmitting energy to you right now. It's a lot of positive energy, and you're transmitting energy back to me. I can see it in your face. You can probably see it in my movements and so on, and my smile. I mean, and we're locking in at the energy level, at the spiritual level. We're locking in. If we weren't locking in, we'd be having arguments, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that is ignored by the materialism, scientific materialism, and people are happy with that, and they don't want to upset the apple cart, because one is safe when one repeats, the cycle of things that you do. Oh yes, I've done that before, so that is safe. Therefore, I should get the same result. It doesn't matter that the result may be negative. Maybe you can't see the connection with the negativity, because then you always blame somebody else if the result is negative. But that's what you feel safe with. So in terms of, you might say, the clash between African centered consciousness and the consciousness that derives from the idea of materialism as primary, is vast. Because African centered consciousness is without borders. It hooks you into the source. So it is unlimited. And being unlimited, then it taps into omnipotence and omnipresence and omniscience. So that you have then contact with this whole source of creativity, if you tap into that consistently. And that is African centered consciousness. And that's how everybody is a genius in that sense, or everybody can be a genius if you tap into that, because we were made in the image of God. I mean, that has come through the Christian religion, which, as came out of Kemet, But so each of us has this genius, this God-given genius in us. But we have been programmed by the culture and the society in which we live. I'm speaking now of us in the West, and perhaps many people also in Africa, that we are conditioned by this culture, and therefore our understanding of self is limited. We no longer have this omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent essence, which is the basis of mind. And when we are able to deprogram mind, then we get to this level, and we can experience this level of awareness, this level of clarity, and this level of unobstructedness, and we can manifest who we truly are and the oneness of ourselves with all of nature. As you know, our ancestors called God, nature, natero, and we now call it nature. But nature is God, and we are part of nature, and all of life is sacred, and living life is sacred. It's not simply a material, physical existence. I think I've kind of said a mouthful, and maybe we need to unpack that in pieces or something, Dr. Washington, or your comments back and forth.
Well, I mean, this is when brilliance speaks, you just got to sit down and be quiet, right? So if anybody was listening, right, I think that anybody with just to hear the brilliance and the genius that came out of just that particular exposition, the idea of juxtaposing an African worldview, the idea of all things being connected to the bifurcation model that that was presented about the materialism, the scientific materialism of Europeans. I mean, that alone is heavy. My smile came when you mentioned about neuroplasticity and grooves, and I was thinking about how many of my students have no idea of groove. I thought about an album, right? So it's like they'll know about albums that they know about CDs and now even about downloads and stuff. So that's where my smile came from. Like, I don't know if they really understand what a groove is, but also this idea of groove in the sense that one can get caught into a conversation or connectivity piece. And so we know that African conversation and reality is concentric circles. So when you say we're off track, we're not necessarily moving in a linear frame of reference anyway. So everything is connected. When you say concentric, it means that there are these circles that are coming together that are unifying themselves. So if you think about jazz music, for example, Coltrane, that's what I was really also experiencing. The idea of jazz is that you always have the main refrain, right? So the riffs can.
I love Supreme.
Right. You're already back there. Now you can ride all day long, but you got to come back. You got to lock it in right there. So even though the conversation was moving in these directions, you still was stuck in the same, in this case, a groove. And the groove was that there is a distinction between the reductionistic conversation, a discourse of Western thought, which you said is scientific materialism, and the expansive discourse of what it means to be human and spirit in the African context. And so we are caught because we are conditioned. That's what you said, right? We are conditioned by the Western thought, and we can only think that way. So we're stuck in that rut of Western thought, but at the same time have the experience or the capacity to be someplace else. And so, Dr. Garvey, really what the example that hits me here is that a flea that has a capacity to jump 6 feet high is placed in a jar that's 5 inches high, and after a period of time, it hit the lids of that jar, and you take a lid off, it will eventually not jump out of the jar, even though it has the capacity to jump 6 feet. It will only jump 5 inches high. But the worst part about it is that it will have offsprings that will often also jump 5 inches, even though it has the capacity. So what you then reveal to us is that we talk about the scientific materialism. We're talking about a reductionistic discourse of really the expansive capacity of humanity. You open up by saying that we talk about awareness, power, and intelligence, known as Amun, Ra, and Ptah. And I think that people need to understand, like, where is that coming from? What does that really mean? So we know that in ancient Kemet, the notion of humanity is that everybody was divine. You actually said that, is that we recognize that we are God force. And I asked the question, open up by asking this question in the second part of this, was what is it about African consciousness that could be criminal? And I think that what you hit here was when one begins to see oneself as divine in a space where they're supposed to see themselves as subhuman, it is an act of criminality because the basis of a reductionistic population is having someone to oppress and be over. So if I don't have anyone to be better than, if you think about this, if there's no inferior group, then racial superiority can't exist. So in large part, white ideology, talk about J. Edgar Hoover and others, doesn't have a position to stand on if it has someone, if it doesn't have anybody that is inferior to it. So when you talk about the Honorable Marcus Garvey saying that we are humans, that we have identity, that we have respect, that we are divine, it begins to shift the relationship, and that's the criminal act. The criminal act is, how dare you not give me something to stand on? And so your positioning of seeing yourself as being a God force, the Kemetic conversation of Amun, right? The complete one, the Ra, the illuminator, Ptah, the bringer into being concept. When that is taken away, I mean, when that becomes your theology, your positioning, now you're taking away my position because I need to be your God as whiteness. So So anyway, that's what you said, and so I love it. And then you talked about, even think about the men who are coming back from the war and around the time of this of the forming of the UNIA, and why that was so important is that, again, having seen something in the world, then proclaiming oneself to be human when it was imperative to have someone to be subhuman so they could have someone to be better than. And so I think that's the danger of African consciousness to the oppressor, is that men and women begin to see themselves as sacred and divine, and not see themselves as some kind of inferior being, and live in the space of, you said, the sensory nature, or the neuroplasticity of the rut of habit, right? And so, yes, that's what you said. So I don't know, you take it from there about the awareness, power, and intelligence. Go back to that about awareness. So we've taken up enough time on Eurocentric thought and its reductionism. Let's talk about who we are as a people, so we can really go somewhere, because that's where you're blowing up right there. So our system is about awareness, power, and intelligence. Go ahead.
Okay, I just want to take up on what you just said in terms of criminality, because it's like somebody who is innocent and is in jail and trying to break out of jail. And when they catch him breaking out of jail, they say he's a criminal for breaking out of jail. Or somebody who is in the insane asylum and he's sane, and he says, my God, these people around me are insane. I don't belong in here. And he's trying to get out of the insane asylum. And the people who are running the insane asylum come after him and says, no, you belong in here, in this insane asylum. So it really is as stark as that when you get to be outside the box that you've been put into. And that's what, my dad said way back. Others, we have to liberate our minds from mental slavery, because, whilst others may help us to liberate the body, none but ourselves can free the mind. And that's of extreme importance. So it's an effort that we have to make, but we have to understand that it's there, because we've been miseducated for so long. And we go back to Carter G. Woodson back in 33, 34, with his understanding of how so many of us had been miseducated within the system. And we have our PhDs or masters, bachelors, whatever, or different certificates on the same courses of education that the people who have oppressed us have designed. So we are participating in the same mindset. So what we end up doing is oppressing ourselves, because there's nobody else to oppress. We are lowest on the totem pole to begin with. That's where we've been put by the system. And we're learning the same system of oppression. So we oppress ourselves. And that's how we come to hate ourselves, because the system that was designed is designed to dehumanize us, and it hates us. So we absorb all of that. So there's so much negative behavior in terms of how we function. Now, as you say, let's get to the light in terms of who we really are as a people. And of course, you have to go back to Kemet, but we mentioned that it has been brought forward by so many different subcultures, if you will, on the African continent. And it's been rediscovered by people such as you, Dr. Washington, in terms of, for example, this story of Osar, Oset, and Heru. That's the oldest story in the world. I mean, it goes back to more than 4,000 BC. And yet still, it's the most important, it's the greatest story in the world, because it's all about what came to be called Christianity, because Heru is the Karas, but he's the anointed one. He's the light that is present in each one of us. Each one of us is the Heru and has to make that journey of the Heru, which is the hero. It's not, some half man, half divine person who came once and set some example, and some of the rest of us are to do it. How can we do it when we're not the same as him and he's not the same as us? So that was a perversion of our system. And many of us are caught up in that, as a religion, as opposed to be understanding the original spirituality of it. Now, to get to that, it requires a process of deprogramming. I started to talk about programming, and we're a human by a computer. And the wonderful difference between us and the robot is that we can program ourselves. But we have just been programmed, and we've been reprogramming ourselves based on the original software that we have been given. Now, we have to then now deprogram, and then reprogram ourselves. And the only way we can do this is to develop the experience of the consciousness that we talked about that is primary. And of course, we get to the technique of meditation, so to speak. But then one has to have some sort of preliminary understanding of mind. We've talked about this a bit in terms of mind perceiving through the five senses, and then because of feelings and thought, and then the intellect, one that then makes the decision and then acts, and then that creates the loop of a perception and then action, and you repeat the actions, and that develops the groove in terms of your mind-body complex, and you do it over and over and over because you think it's right and you've been taught that that's right. Well, now you have to be able to look at that mind, and the only way to look at that mind is to quiet the mind itself, because I have to get to a situation where mind is looking at mind. And again, this is called meditation. It can be called awareness. It can be called mindfulness. Any of those, terms can be used, and there are different methodologies to be able to do it. But the basic thing, the first most important thing, is to quiet the mind, because we have the so-called monkey mind, where all kinds of thoughts are popping up all the time, usually without our control. And real thinking is thinking that we control, but most of the time we have thoughts that we don't control, and that prevents us from being able to see ourselves as we are primarily. So we have to find a way to quieten the mind. Once you're able to do that, that quiet mind can begin then the process of looking at itself, looking at how it functions. For example, where is this I? Because now when we talk about mind, it is made up of ego. That's like the number one thing that we have, because that's our identity. Our identity is our ego. Now that ego was created over time, partly by intellect and partly by the input from outside that the intellect uses. And then we have intellect, we have ego, and then we have what might be called mind, which is the interface between our cognitive process and the senses. And I don't want to get too deep into that, but the senses bring an image to our brain, if you will, and then the brain processes the image and turns it into what it is that we see, hear, feel, and so on and so forth. So everything that we experience is created by mind. It's not necessarily experience that's out there. It's created by mind. Everything that we experience is created by mind, and everything that we do is caused by mind, because mind then tells us to act this way or don't act that way, etc. Mind functions on the basis of desire to a large extent. I like this or I don't like it. If I like it, after the contact with the senses and so on, if I like it, I want to hold on to it. I want to grasp it. I want to cling to it. And I want to repeat it over time. If I don't like it, I want to reject it and push it out of my way. I'll get angry and so on. And because, again, of my ignorance, I feel satisfied in this type of behavior. So that's my behavior pattern over time. And that's considered normal. You see, but it's not normal because it's based on a misunderstanding of nature, which is the big picture, just based on scientific materialism and the information that comes from the senses. So we have to get to that understanding of how mind functions. And then when we can see how mind functions in the way that I've just told you, there are these 5 consciousnesses, which are the sensual consciousnesses. There's the 6th consciousness, which you can call it a mental consciousness. And then there's the 7th consciousness, which we can call ego. And then there's the 8th consciousness, which we call intellect. So those are the superficial consciousnesses that we function with. But they are disconnected from that deep consciousness that we talked about, which is which people like Jung call the collective unconscious. But it's not unconscious. There's no such thing as unconsciousness. There's only consciousness. You know, I mean, if you're unconscious, you're dead. You know, where there's life, there's consciousness. So, you know, we have a lot of these theories that are absolutely crazy when you pull them apart and try to understand them. So this is the superficial consciousness. Those 8 consciousnesses that I just described are these superficial consciousnesses. And you can get to look at them one by one. In other words, if you have some calmness of mind, you can look at a thought that arises in your mind. And you can see that it arises, it sits there for a while, and then it goes away.
So we're gonna go back. We're gonna go back and visit the last part because that's a critical breakdown, right? We need to stop and catch the ideas of the mind. I just want you to know that you said that we are perverted. I want you to know that's where you started a long time ago, right? You said that we function as a with a perverted mindset. And you are absolutely correct. The idea of perversion that is moving away from the original form. And you mentioned the program like a robot concept, and that we have to be reprogrammed. And someone typed in, we have to learn, unlearn, and relearn. Was their particular interpretation of that? And so when you talk about this idea of being perverted, I just want to kind of capture this as we begin to shift into this idea of mind and quiet in the mind and meditation, what that means. When you talk about being perverted, we're saying then that the exposure to the alien constructs of Western thought, which is reductionistic in nature, tends to move us into an inhumane position such that we begin to accept our inhumanity as normalcy. So within the context of being in the U.S., we can become the derogatory form of the word Negro is nigger. We can become nigger. We can become a female dog, bitch. We can become a manipulative tool, hoe. That becomes the identity of a population because of being, as you suggested, the idea of being perverted. But when you know who you are, an idea of reprogramming is that when you then reprogram that particular entity, you then shift it into a different way of being. And I think that we become so accustomed to being perverted that we begin to see the constructive reality or the truth as being the problem. For example, we can do a great job of selling oppression to our people. I tell my students about the fake hair, right? The synthetic hair. We can, and the nails and the eyelashes and so forth and so on, all the things that we do. We can sell that, and we can have a long discussion about getting hair done and that kind of thing. But when it comes down to honoring the coiliness of the hair and respecting how beautiful that is, that becomes something that people spew out because we lived in the perversion of that who we are and what comes from us is inferior. And so I think that's the idea of the programming. But even when we get the programming right, we start doing the programming, we need to also have the updates. And I think every now and then my computer says that the updates are available. And so if I'm running still on 9.8 and they're already on 10.2, then I'm running the computer, but I'm not adapting to the updates. And so it even tells me, my computer says that you must leave it on and also plugged into a power source. A powerful piece, right? We got to keep our minds on the idea of stay woke, at the same time plug into a power source, that is, plug into something that is greater than ourselves, so that we can actually elevate in consciousness. And so this is where you were ending this idea about quieting the mind. And some talk about meditation, medi, the idea of between one state and the other, that they are dimensions of ourselves, that the self is in our wakefulness, the self is also in our sleep, and the self is also in our dreams and in our daydreams, right? So the same consciousness is running through all of those things. That's why you can have dreams about some event that you actually encounter, but also you can have a dream about something that you will encounter. So the idea is that the self is not only here, we know the self is not only here spiritually, or I said it already, we're not here just material, but we also spiritual. And that the only way that you can get to that is that you quiet the mind to connect, and then make the real connection. And you said many times we cannot connect because we have a lot of bad programming or signals that are distracting us. And I'll say it this way, that many times people will suggest that the sun is rising. The sun never rises nor sets, or says that the sun is coming out. The sun can't come out because the sun is always in position. And she said, Kemet knew that a long time ago. The clouds may block us. And so sometimes we have this blockage of this cloud, that we can't see the brilliance that's within us, the sun, the illumination, because we have this cloudiness. And you say that when we begin to quiet the mind and begin to see self, we begin to move back those clouds, and then we begin to see the enlightenment. And Sister Olorun Tonya says that love and light, thank you for the enlightenment. The problems conflicting African people worldwide is continuing to operate in the logic of Eurocentric consciousness. Trying to conform to Eurocentrism is the root of all economic, mental, social, and political problems Africans are facing. We have to return home, which always include spirit. She says that it is the root of economic, mental, social, and psychological problems. Somebody said that when you were talking about the mind and spirit, they said that we love to talk about the fruits, but don't go down to the roots. And so so Sister Ola Toyon just made it very, very profound that we are stuck in a Eurocentric, and we try to make that normal. But you said that quiet the mind, meditate. And that's one thing that we have a difficult time doing. We often let external chatter become an internal matter, that we hear this stuff. And Sister Ola, Tonya and I we were in the Gambia with other groups, some other groups of people, her significant other and others, my wife. And so we were there. And I can tell you that when I was in the Gambia, it was easy to quiet my mind, to hear something very different, to be by the ocean. As a matter of fact, that we end up with the cortisol spread as men. And so history shows traditional martial arts, complete internal, external systems are the best way for men to quiet their minds. Thank you, Remy. So we know then that when I was in that space, cortisol spread takes over. And in that space, quieted the mind. And when I came back, Dr. Garvey, I lost a waist size, right? And I had to think about, how did I lose it? And I'm there doing everything the same way. I exercise every day. The issue was I was not in constant conflict with racism and oppression conversations. Mm-hmm. And when I was doing my work, when I was engaged in the physical activity of exercise and moving with people, my mind was quiet. When I did my drumming, my mind was quiet from all the other things. And so I think that's important. You said that's what they talked about in Kemet. Now, Remy mentioned about the martial arts, the idea, capoeira, we understand all of these things have their African roots. And so that is a way to quiet the mind, to be able to defend. But let's go back to where you ended. You were saying how the mind functions, and you went to 6, 7, and 8. I mean, 5, 6, and 7. I want to go back because that's heavy. You mentioned the 5 senses, which is very limited early on, and now you're saying that we need to know how the mind functions, and you were saying something about the dimensions of the mind. There, go there.
Okay, you mentioned the 5 senses. Well, the five senses brings information to mind. Our mind has to perceive it. So the initial perception is the sixth sense. It's a mind sense which develops thoughts, and you see something. It may be vague, or it may be red in color, but you begin to make a shape out of it. You get an image out of it. And that's the first situation, and you put a thought to it, and then if you have a feeling about it, that's number 7. The 7th consciousness is kind of like feeling. I like it, I don't like it. That's part of sensation consciousness. And then the intellect says, okay, I've seen that thing before. And okay, while the mental consciousness may say it's kind of a square and has a tail and a head or something like that, and the feeling say, well, it looks dangerous, and then the intellect will say, based on previous experience, oh, that's a cow. That's not a lion or whatever it is. That's a cow. So don't be afraid of it. So that's how the mind works in terms of perception. Now, that happens very quickly. So that's why your mind has to be quiet to be able to see the sort of sequences that you do. You do those things reflexively, and you've done them from the time you were a little kid, and you just do it over and over and over again. But when you quiet the mind, you can begin to see those different things. You can see a thought rising in your mind. You can see a feeling or an emotion. You think about ice cream, and you say, you see the desire comes up. But then you look at the desire for the ice cream, and you can look at it, and of course, it's simply a movement of energy of mind. So unless you try to keep it in your mind, it is going to come up because it came spontaneously, and it's going to go back down. So you're able now to extend the quiet of your mind, and you're able now to begin to analyze how your mind works, and you'll be able to see now that this is how your mind works under any kind of situation that your senses bring to you, whether it's sight, from our perspective, you see a beautiful woman with big boobs or whatever, or some other attributes that you like, so they're there, but, you can even rationalize it and say, all it is fat, and skin, and that may help it to go away quicker. And then you realize that all of these, sensory inputs come and go. But what is it that is lasting? It's your awareness. You see, and most of us don't consider our awareness as a reality. We consider the things that we're aware of as the realities. But the things that we're aware of are temporary. They come and go, come and go, come and go. They're not real in that sense. The absolute reality is our awareness, our consciousness. It's primary. It's our fundamental nature, you see? And that is the essence of our mind. So when we can get to that, now, of course, it takes a long time to go through this in terms of your abilities. In terms of meditation, of course, some people try to hasten this with different entheogenic substances, psilocybin, LSD, and so on, or there are many methods, tantric methods, and so on, ayahuasca, and so on and so on and so forth. So, but all of them really deal with this business of getting you to that stage of consciousness or awareness, where you can be aware of your own functioning of your mind. Then now you become aware then of the reality that's out there, which is the relative reality of the world itself. But you're able to see that from a position of, and that's what I mentioned before, not just awareness, but clarity. You can see clearly what is happening. And then you become that awareness and that clarity. And then that is unobstructedness that lasts over time. So that is now your new state of mind or your new reality. which is the essence of who you are, which is a self-aware presence. And this self-aware presence is one with universal presence. So, that's a very quick analysis, shall we say, and prescription of how you get from point A to point B, point A being scientific materialism, and then point B being the spiritual reality of the universe. So, but obviously it's a process, and it takes very often years and years, depending on where you start from and how soon in your life you start the process. Many of us, don't get to that state until, we're in our midlife, and we see that the blandishments of that the civilization around us puts in front of us, the job security, and the wife, the family, the 1.5 houses, the 2.5 cars, or whatever it is, and the umpteen pairs of shoes and shirts and all of these things. They don't really fulfill your hunger for being fully you. And that's what we were talking about before. You can call it perversion, but I mean, it's not being able to experience the fullness of your humanity. You see, in other words, it's the difference between, quotes, a human animal and a full human being. The human animal just deals with the senses and the mind as a brain, which can memorize things and create a plan and function on that plan. And that's a very superficial level. And that's in a sense a waste of our humanity, because we're made in the image of God. We can be co-creators with God. And that's what we're talking about, getting to that level. And that's what we're talking about, that each of us is a genius in our own right, because we can manifest God through us with whatever the talents are that God has given us. And you get back to DNA and so on and so forth. It's all there. Now the difference between somebody being able to express their full humanity or not, we get into this whole business now of epigenetic influences. You see what I mean? Now, if you have the appropriate epigenetic influences, meaning that you have this cosmic consciousness now, then you can use your full complement of the DNA that has been given to you by God, if you will, over these 15 billion years of evolution. I mean, that's fabulous. But we don't do that. You see what I mean? Most of the time, our epigenetic influences are negative, as we're talking about, certainly for us, or they're misshapen, for the group that is oppressing us, because they don't understand reality. They only take out a small piece of reality, and they're misusing it. The scientific materialism, which is destroying the planet, as you know.
Mm. So you mentioned, so you go to.
Well, Kevin is gone. I'm not sure when he's going to come back. But if I can continue from the concept of epigenetic influences, is that we in our DNA we have a whole program of infinite possibilities, because that's how we were created. A part of what we're talking about, being made in the image of God, is the physical part, because we're made in the image of God in the spiritual part. But in order to express that fully, obviously we have to be given the appropriate DNA, which manifests itself in our physical self. So that's our potential. But we do not fulfill our potential when we believe only in scientific materialism. We do not believe in cosmic consciousness or source, whatever we want to call that. And we only believe then in our physical senses and our intellect as mind, which I just broke down to you. Mind being our perceptive apparatus, and our feeling about it, and our intellect in terms of how we categorize things, and then what we tell ourselves to do, our activity. So it's perception and intellect and activity. And then the closed loop that we've talked about, depending on our programming. And the fact is that we have to get beyond that. That's what it means by being transcendental. We have to become transcendental to that psychophysical aspect and get to the spiritual aspect, which is consciousness. Now, when we can get to that through meditation, as I talked about, our different techniques, then we can reprogram ourselves, based on the fullness of the DNA that we have in terms of what we're born with and what we're designed with by the Creator. And then we can become co-creators, and we can create not only for ourselves, but we can create systems that are beneficial. Because the basis of the understanding of yourself as a spiritual being and one with the universe, one with God, is oneness. Now, if there's oneness, then within oneness, everything has to have an order, and design has to follow function. You can't design something unless you know what the function is going to be. So you if you have oneness, and if you have order, because this is what the potential is. All of this is intrinsic to God, meaning this total potential. That's what God is, and it has to be there in terms of the order. Otherwise, it will be chaos. Now, that order we call ma'at, and which is primary. So we have this consciousness, we have this power, we have this intelligence, and we have this order. So when now we begin to create, it is going to manifest the order in terms of the structure that we create in terms of our design, because again, that has to give rise to a certain function, and everything has to be integrated and intercommunicating. So we do that for ourselves, and then we do that in the society in which we live. And you can extrapolate from that understanding of ourselves and nature to create all the systems that we have. I mean, if you look at any of the social systems, whether it's economic or otherwise, if you see all of us, if we see each other as being part of that oneness, then the system that we're going to create is going to respect each and every one in terms of their place within that society. But because that's the only way we can have order. This one has to be able to do that. The other one has to be able to do this. And we have to be able to work together. So we have to be able to communicate within a system of order. So you can't have one person taking advantage of another person. And you can't have one person being super rich and somebody else being super poor. You have to have that system that recognizes our unity. And when you have a system that recognizes our unity, then, as I mentioned, you're going to manifest that in terms of generosity, in terms of kindness, in terms of compassion, and in terms of your own wisdom, in terms of helping somebody else. So that's those types of systems now are totally different from the systems that we have in terms of the European type of systems, where it's all competitive and dog eat dog. And everybody's willing to stab you in the back to get ahead because it's a material-based system. And the guy who has the most toys at the end of the road is the guy who's the winner. But, that's ludicrous from an African point of view, because that does not give you peace, or it does not give you happiness, and it doesn't really give you true wealth or prosperity. It might give you money, and it might give you a mansion to live in. It might give you 10 wives if that's what you want, or 1 wife and 10 concubines. But again, you'll find that does not make you happy. The only way to happiness is the fulfillment of yourself, because part of this business of consciousness power and intelligence is joy. When you are fully you, now you're enjoying yourself. You're in joy. Joy is something that's in you. So this is where we have to go, and we kind of talked a little bit about the system, but this is the end result that we want, the sort of perfect human being, if you will, who is spiritually realized and who manifests that spirit on the physical plane, through good works, through kindness, through generosity, through education, through helping others, through compassion. And that's what we want to see as the new African. I see Sister Oloruntoyin there. I can't hear you, love. I don't know what the story is there. I'm not sure what is happening, but we lost Dr. Washington. I don't hear Sister Oloruntoyin. Kevin, you're back. What's happening? I can't hear Sister Oloruntoyin. Everybody seems to be mute. You're muted. You're muted, Kevin.
Hey, so the most amazing thing happened. My computer died.
Okay.
I couldn't find the power cord. I took the power cord out, hid it from myself. It was right here on my desk. Anyway, so here we are. I don't know what's going on with Sister, but continue. You were making a powerful point. Continue.
Yeah. I kind of wrapped it up in terms of where we had gotten to. In terms of the process that we needed to go through to get to that space of self-aware presence, which is our essence of mind, and being able to express that with clarity, because that's the nature of our mind, and then in terms of our functionality, that it is unobstructed, so that any problems or perturbations in society don't really affect us, because we bring our wisdom to the process, and then we have that clarity of mind and unobstructedness, that we're not going to let anything get in our way, because we know we're right, we know we're correct, and we know that we're working with the forces of nature. So that's the fullness of our humanity, when we can be co-creators with our Creator, God, Amun, Ra, and Ptah. I don't know why everybody is cutting out on me there.
Brother, we are here. We are here with you. I just want you to know that the illumination that you shared in this moment has been profound on multiple levels. And you started off talking about the exoneration conversation about your father. We moved into a part of the dialogue about why Black consciousness is criminal. And we talked then about how that idea of awareness of self as being divine in the context of those that desires to be less than human is problematic. Inside of that, you reminded us of ancient Kemet, of Amun, Ra, Ptah. You reminded us of the idea of mindfulness, connectivity. You talked about the idea of perverted thought. You mentioned that we operate from a position or we learn from this scientific reductionism, a scientific materialism that makes things matter as still rather than spiritual. that for them, we know that in order for it to be real, it must be seen, taste, touched, felt, smelt, or some otherwise experience with the five senses. And that for us, there's a reality that is beyond that. It is that same thing that you said that we feel in the conversation, the energy. I think it's that same thing that made the UNIA so popular, that in the context of people not having cell phones and not having devices to be able to connect social media, that your father was able to mobilize thousands of African people because of the technology of the spirit energy. Mm-hmm. And it was that spirit energy of the Declaration of African Humanity that ties into the idea of consciousness, that one became aware that they were divine, right? So this idea that they became aware that, because that's the idea of consciousness, right? This idea of awareness and then the intellect. And that awareness then led to mobilization. And you said that in order for us to maintain that connectivity, we must unplug, or we must meditate. We must clear the mind to get back to self, because we live in a space where we operate away from self. And so you gave us the African cosmological constructs that we should listen to. And so we need to engage in study. So I encourage all listeners to do the research, to understand ancient Kemetic thought, to know more about what is Amun Ra Ptah. What does that mean? What is Nun Nunet? What is the story of Asar and Aset that was mentioned? Why is it that the oldest narrative that talks about the coming into being, not just simply a physicality, but a spiritual awakeness? And so all of these things are critical. This is African consciousness. And I think I'm going to challenge Brother Daniel here, that I think that this is one that we need to carry on, not just simply have it as a special topics piece, but I think that we need to carry this idea of African consciousness as a regular rolling piece, where we can begin to listen to genius like Dr. Garvey to just unpack just small segments. You mentioned about the mind and the seventh and eighth, the levels, and what does it look like, and how do you manifest it? I think that is so critical, and not simply do a drive-by. So I think this should be a regular conversation. And then Sister Olarun Toyin holding it down from Germany and others, and we just keep pulling this together as a people. And I think this is where we should be, not in the space of survival in the context of European oppression, but the reclamation of self that leads to the elevation, which is seen as criminal by the European. But in reality, it is about African humanity, which is about divinity for African people. So I thank you so much. And I thank Brother Daniel for pulling this together. Mwambonu, he is phenomenal. The brother is doing work. I don't know when he sleeps. I don't know when he eats. I don't know when he does anything. All I know is that he has us doing one more assignment after another. But the reality is that this work is essential. So, Sister Olarun, can we hear you now? I see you making verbals. Can we hear you? Can you say something as we get ready to close? And then Dr. Garvey, you will have the closing words for the day to give us our marching orders as African people. Sister, can you speak? Okay, there's that.
It's not coming through.
There's that German lag. Okay. We blame it on the German lag. That's what it is.
you know, Kevin, if I can call you Kevin, we'll drop the formalities to some degree. You talk about reclaiming our mind, and that's more or less exactly what my father called it. He said the redemption of Africa. So it's the redemption of African consciousness and the reclamation of our ancestry and our people, our identity as who we are. And again, we're the original people, and we brought consciousness, we brought human consciousness to planet Earth, and that's how God set it up. So we have to go back to that, and we have to reclaim that, because when transforming ourselves, we'll transform the world. And that's what the world needs right now, a reclamation of our African civilization. And this is what we're about.
Right. So
a pleasure to be with you.
Just that at all, right? Just that's that statement alone, right? If we say Free yourself. Let's start right there, right? Free yourself. What does it mean to be free? Right? Then we go from mental slavery, right? What is slavery and what is mental slavery? Then we go to none but ourselves. The question then is, who are we? Right? So just that alone, we can unpack that. So free yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves have the capacity, can go back to free our mind. That's what it said, right? Free. So that is critical. That's just see those things. Just taking that alone, that phrase right there alone would be moments, right? Free yourself means that you're in captivity, but you got to have an awareness that you captive. Then it says not just of anything, but mental slavery, which means then that if you say free yourself from mental slavery, it means that there are more things that keep you held captive than mental slavery. But the first one you got to do is free your from mental slavery. And then it says you can't look for something outside of yourself to do it. The power is within. So none but ourselves have the capacity to free ourselves. How do we do that? That's what we need to talk about next, is how do we make actually that statement alone of freeing ourselves from mental slavery and know that we have the capacity to do it and stop looking to somebody else. Because Carter Woodson says that if the Negro in the ghetto look to the hand and put it into the ghetto to get out of the ghetto, it will never get out of the ghetto. And we keep looking to the oppressor. Said this way, that if the drug user looks to the drug pusher to take him to rehab, he'll never get to rehab. And so we keep looking to the oppressor to free us. But it is in his interest to have us oppressed. Brother, this is powerful. I don't know what Daniel is, but Daniel has set the stage for something that is powerful, and we're going to keep this going. Sister Olorun Toyin says, African Centered Consciousness in all areas is essential for our empowerment and our liberation. And Daniel says, Asante Sana, he says, thank you, Ndugu. I thank Brother Daniel for this moment. And Dr. Garvey, I thank you for sharing love and light and liberation. I'm selfish today because you gave a lot to me. And I'm sure that everybody should have some light that hit them from your brilliance, just like the sun hits us all. You've given us some warmth. You've given us some encouragement. Someone said you've given us wisdom, but you've given us ourselves back. And so the legacy of greatness continues. Thank you so much.
Well, the giving goes both ways, Kevin. And I'm thankful to you, and I'm thankful for Daniel for this moment. And I do hope also that we can continue this discussion, because I think it is important for us to free our minds from mental slavery.
He says absolutely. So we have him hemmed up in a corner.
Two against one, right? we got him.
We're gonna get him now. We got him. But Daniel is phenomenal, and we hope that all that have listened today do your homework, know yourself, stop, meditate, allow yourself to get cleared of the clutter. Get in touch with who you really are, not who they say you are, but who you really are, because they will tell you who you are based on what they need you to become. But when you listen to the divine voice from within, it'll tell you what you are to be. And in the beingness is where you actually rise up and become more divine. So understand who you're serving. And when you're serving those that are oppressing you, then as Dr. Garvey says, you become a victim of your own oppression, self-oppression. But if you serve the one that created you, the one that called you into being, the one that called the cells to find one another inside the womb, the one that allowed you to form arms and eyes and all that, if you honor that, then you will be in a place that is divine. So we need not to follow the voice of the oppressor and be perverted, but convert ourselves to be divine. Thank you.
I say.
Not